Hello and welcome. Today we will study Sylvia Plath's Daddy. So, the style of Sylvia Plath's poetry is often called confessional poetry. Here, the speaker comes to terms with the fraught relationship with her father, and she expresses anger and breaks apart from her childhood trauma. Having lived through a phase of violence, she now talks about it openly. The poem was widely criticized for the images of Black Holocaust, and the speaker's father here is compared to a Nazi. And we know that since her father had come to or migrated to America long before Nazi Germany had begun, this particular comparison is not close to truth, but we see it in the context that she writes, and she talks from the point of view of a child who identifies everything that comes close to her father as being Nazi. And this is the imbalance of power between the father and the daughter is symbolic of the broader power difference or power imbalance between genders, and she later talks about being exploited in her marriage as well. And although while Plath uses the confessional mode, she is using anger as the device to voice out her the oppressive nature of gender norms in this particular poem. And also in the rest of her work, we see that she does protest against this disparity between the two genders. And so this poem was published in 1965 in a collection called Ariel, and it was completed just before her death. And just before her death, she had this one very fertile time, or a prolific time, where she wrote a number of poems, and the poetry collection of Ariel is actually all the poems, most of the poems that she had written during this time. And she confronts here in this poem her father's death that happened when she was child. She was just 8 years old when her father had actually died. But in this poem, in this poem, she says that now she's 30, so it's been some time since her father has dead. He's been dead. But through the poem, she comes to terms with all the years of retrospective pain that she went through even after her father's death. And this is also the time, 1960s is the time when Holocaust images are being revisited, because Adolf Eichmann, who was actually a worker for Nazi Germany, his trial was conducted. So when his trial was conducted, in the public sphere, people revisited all the crimes or everything that happened to the Jews during the Holocaust. So maybe the poem is rich in all these images because of the recent nature of all these images which were flown through this time. So let's begin with this poem. You do not do any more black shoe, in which I have lived like a foot for 30 years, poor and white, barely daring to breathe or achoo. So we notice that this rhyme is imitating almost a nursery rhyme. It is an oversimplified rhythm structure. Do, shoo, achoo. These are words which rhyme, and it's a very simplistic rhyme. And she compares her being trapped in a relationship as if being trapped in a shoe, and inside the shoe it's always dark and suffocating. And this is the picture that she draws to talk about the way the relationship with her father was very stifling to her. And the color white here is representative of lifelessness. And even in another poem, which is Tulips, which is one of her hospital poems, in this particular poem also she describes the color white as being the color of lifelessness. So the next stanza is, Daddy, I have had to kill you. You died before I had time, marble heavy, a bag full of God, ghastly statue with one grey toe, big as fresco seal. Now, here she talks about the image of her father, which for her as a child, it was for her too big to conceive of, and she would be oppressed by this larger than life figure of her father, whom she perhaps had to impress all the time. So she says now that she's had to kill him, or kill his influence that seems to have affected her through the years. And right now she says that she's 30 years, so his influence seems to have lingered presence for a long time. And later in the poem we also know that she's also trapped in a similar power equation with her husband, from whom she is now freed herself. So her father died when she was 8 years old, and this is a retrospective feeling of anger and frustration. She compares it to a bag full of God, and marble heavy. So this particular image shows that something which is really a burden, something which gives you a feeling of being afraid or being terrified. And the fear and trepidation which sometimes religious fervor, sometimes the religious view of God brings in, that's the same feeling that she had about her father. So it is mostly a burden. And she calls him a ghastly statue. Now this ghastly statue is the statue of the Colossus of Rhodes, which is also the image that I have put in the slide. So the Colossus of Rhodes was a statue of the Greek sun god of Helios, which erected in this ancient city in 280 BC, and it was destroyed, and the parts of this particular statue are now found in different parts of the world. So she says that part of the head of this particular statue was seen in Atlantic. Um, and so she says that she conceives of her father, she thinks of her father as this big ghastly statue, who has this big toe which is almost the same color as a sea lion, and the same grayish color. And this is also a historical reference to her father, who had perhaps had a black toe or an infected toe. So she compares her father basically to a very huge, but perhaps an ugly image, um, because she brings in the image of that infected toe. So the head in the freakish Atlantic, where it pours bean green over blue in the waters of beautiful Nauset. I used to pray to recover you. Ah, do. And so she says that now she draws an image of Nauset. This is the name of the beach where she had grown, and this is also the image that I've put on this slide of the seashore that she describes. And She says that I used to pray when she used to pray when her father was ill. Her father had died when she was very young, and he had died perhaps of complications caused by diabetes. And through her father's illness, she was not able to visit him because her mother would be taking care of the father, and the children were during this time staying with a relative. And so she may have actually spent time praying for the recovery of her father, which really did not come through. And but now she's saying that, oh, I used to pray for the father's recovery. And Achtu is actually a German term. Oh, you. So she says, I used to pray to recover you. Oh, you. So it's like a sigh. um, the next stanza goes, in the German tongue, in the Polish town, scraped flat by the roller of wars, wars, wars. But the name of the town is common. My Polak friend says there are a dozen or two. So I never could tell where you put your foot, your root. I never could talk to you. The tongue stuck in my jaw. It stuck in a barbed wire snare. Ish, ish, ish. I could hardly speak. I thought every German was you, and the language obscene. Now there is a small historical reference. Her father had actually come from Germany, and from a small village called Grabau. And this particular town was later ravaged by wars. And so she says that if there is this town called Grabau where you came from, there are so many villages of the same name, and in any case these villages have been just flattened by so many wars that this country has gone through, that I can't really put my finger on where my ancestry is, where my father really came from. So she could never, because she could never get to know where her father came from, she could never even identify who her father really was and where her German roots lie. And in any case, she finds this language extremely obscene. And a general understanding of German is that many people find this particular language uh, a little non-sweet, is what I would say. So this language is known to be a language which is not very pleasant on the ears, and that's what this is the stereotype that she reiterates in her poem as well. And we notice that the first stanza ends and the second stanza begins, and it's the same line. So this particular poetic device is called enjambment. So she says, my Polak friend says there are dozen or two, so I could never tell where you put your foot, your root. I never could talk to you. So she says that she was never able to speak to her father either in the native language which her father had identified with, and also because perhaps the power equation between the daughter and the father was difficult for her to manage. And she says it's stuck in a barbed wire snare, ish, ish, ish. So it's almost like she's never able to speak to her father in that language. And ish, ish, ish is actually I in German. So she wanted to say I. She wanted to express herself to her father, but she's never able to do that. And she's showing this desperation in these lines. I could hardly speak. I thought every German was you, and the language obscene. So everything that came from Germany, she identified it with her father, and that's why she says that I thought every German was you, and the language obscene. We look at the next stanza. An engine shuffling me off like a Jew to Dachau, Auschwitz, Belsen. I began to talk like a Jew. I think I may as well be a Jew. So here she uses again this image of the views of repetition, and this is to emphasize on the image that she draws, and also going back to that childlike rhythm that she had started this poem off with. So she says that she calls her identifies her father as a Nazi, and she says an engine shuffling me off like a Jew, just like the Nazis had really destroyed Jews. Her father, in a way, has completely negated her presence. So shuffling me off like a Jew in Dachau, Auschwitz, Belsen. So she compares herself to the Jews of Dachau, Auschwitz, and Belsen. Now, this particular comparison of that she draws with her suffering, her childhood trauma to Jews of Dachau, Auschwitz, and Belsen is a little bit of an exaggeration, and perhaps that's the reason she is often criticized for these images, because these images are rather serious for the purpose that she puts them to. But if we try to understand that the pain that she wants to describe, that she perhaps wants to describe the enormous amount of pain that she had gone through in this relationship, and that's the reason perhaps she uses the images of concentration camps. I began to talk like a Jew. I think I may as well be a Jew. So in this particular thing, she says that she imagines her mother also to be a part Jew, though it's not true for Sylvia Plath's mother. But through this comparison, she hints that her father's tyranny was not only destroying her, but he was also tyrannical over her mother as well. And this statement may as well have some truth to it, because when Aurelia Plath talks about her choice of not working when she had gotten married, the father may have perhaps deterred her from pursuing her dreams. So Sylvia Plath, when she talks about her father's relationship with her own mother, she says that maybe the father had also exploited the mother. Again, these are slight exaggerations, but we can't comment on whatever would have happened in a personal life. And this is the expression, again, I would say, this is the expression of the pain that she wants to express now, and the kind of pain that she wants to get to terms with discussing this. The next stanza is, the snows of Tyrol, the clear beer of Vienna are not very pure or true. With my gypsy ancestors and my weird luck and my Torak pack, I may as well be a Jew. I may be a bit of a Jew. Now she says that every other creature, every other person um, who were exploited by the Jews, she identifies herself with those people. So the Jews, the people who were identified, who were exploited by the Nazis, she identifies herself with all those people. So the Nazis had also exploited gypsies, so she identifies herself with a gypsy also. So she says that she may as well be a gypsy, and gypsies are the people who carry tarot packs. And she's continuing to criticize the Germans by alluding to the idea of racial purity, as she compares the snows of Tyrol, which is a state in Austria, and the clear beer of Vienna to the German idea of racial purity. She concludes that such assumptions are not true, so they are not actually pure. And then the speaker considers her own ancestry by calling one of her ancestors gypsy. Just like Jews, gypsies were also executed by the Nazis, and so the speaker identifies not only with Jews but also with gypsy. And with this, she is able to identify with everything which the Nazis have a problem with. In fact, she seems to identify with anyone who has ever felt oppressed by the Nazis. Um, I have always been scared of you. With your Luftwaffe, your gobbledygoo, and your neat moustache, and your Aryan eye, bright blue, Panzerman, oh you. Now here again you have images of war, again from Germany. Luftwaffe was the air weapon in the German army which was used in the world wars, and gobbledygoo is actually unintelligible language. So she says, I have always been scared of you, of your air weapons, of your Luftwaffe, and your language, and your neat moustache, and your Aryan eye, bright blue, Panzerman. Panzerman was German tank drivers. So again, with all these images, she says she calls her father, the German, identifies her father with the destructive images from the German army. Okay, so she calls him an air weapon. She compares him to the German tank driver. So with all this, she's again drawing upon the image of oppression and exploitation. Not God, but swastika, so black no sky could squeak through. Every woman adores a fascist. The boot in the face, the brute heart of a brute like you. Now she talks about the Nazi appropriation of the swastika. And so she says, not God, but swastika. Earlier, she had compared her father to a bag full of God, and now in a way, she's qualifying that image with swastika, and she's saying that you're not even God, you were swastika. And of course, we know that the swastika was interpreted in the most inappropriate way by the Nazis, and they had completely taken this image and justified a lot of violence through images of self-righteousness. And so she says that Nazi appropriation of swastika, which was wrong in its own way. Swastika was symbolic of Nazi regime, and so she calls it so black that no sky could squeak through. The Nazi regime of Hitler was dark and devoid of any light. And here she also compares in jest, saying that women have a tendency to like men who dominate and exploit them. They end up liking fascist. So her own infatuation with an exploitative relationship. And here's post-marriage Plath, she alludes to her exploitative relationship with her husband also. So in the next next stanza, she says, you stand at the blackboard, Daddy, in the picture I have of you, a cleft in your chin instead of your foot, but no less a devil for that, no, not any less the black man who bit my pretty red heart in two. I was 10 when they buried you. At 20, I tried to die and get back to you. I thought even the bones would too. Now she talks about a picture of her father that she has, and there's this picture which I've also shown in the slide. So the picture has her father standing in front of the blackboard, and he has a cleft in the chin, and that's what she talks about. She says that you stand in front of the blackboard. In the picture I have of you a cleft in your chin instead of your foot. So the cleft was the cleft basically means divided, and traditionally the devil would have cleft feet, or would be depicted with cloven feet. And so she sees, basically through this images, she sees a father as the image of the devil. And and then she says, now now we know that her father has been dead for 20 years, but through her childhood she loved him dearly, and it is possible that as a child she was able to love him despite this apparent cruelty, which she now sees as an adult in this man. And as a result, as an adult, however, she's now able to see through all the problems. And here she also compares her father to the man, her husband basically, who she says who bit her pretty red heart in two. Now notice that the black, so her heart she compares to a pretty red heart, and eventually we would also see that the father's heart is compared to this black heart. We also see the enjambment, the lines any less the black man who bit my pretty red heart. This is one line, but she divides it into two different stanzas. So this is enjambment. And here again, she is drawing this comparison between her father and her husband. And she says that at 10, we try to bury you, and at 20 I try to die and get back to you. And this is the allusion to her own suicide attempt, which she had tried to commit suicide when she was in her early 20s, and this particular attempt was sensationalized, and that's what she's hinting at in this particular stanza. We look at the next stanza. But they pulled me out of the sack and they stuck me together with glue. And then I knew what to do. I made a model of you, a man in black with a Mein Kampf look. Now she's, as I was saying, this is the reference to her suicide attempt of 1953, when she had hid herself under the porch after having her mother's sleeping pills. And so this was her attempt to commit suicide. So this particular disappearance, she had disappeared, and her mother had thought that there is something wrong. So she had tried to look for her, and this disappearance was sensationalized, and finally she was found and her life was saved. But eventually she was sent to a mental institution where she had a really bad time. And her biographer Heather Clark also notes that she was given a botched treatment, or her treatment wasn't given in the right manner, and this perhaps left a very grave mark on her, and she's never able to completely recover herself from the pain of not only the mental illness but also the pain of recovery and staying in the mental institution. So she hints that she was not okay when she returned after the 6 months of her treatment, and that's what she means when she says they stuck me together with glue. And then she says she made a model of you, basically meaning that finding a replacement of her father through her husband was Ted Hughes. So she was married to Ted Hughes for a while, and this is this phrase that she talks about. And Mein Kampf is basically the name of My Struggles, which is the biography of Hitler. And the Mein Kampf look basically meaning that her husband does not flinch while torturing someone, meaning that he is also a Nazi, and she is therefore identifying both her husband as well as her father with Nazis. And we look at the next stanza. And a love And a love of the rack and the screw. I said, I do, I do. So, daddy, I'm finally through. The black telephone's off at the root. The voice just can't warn through. And so, the love of the rack and the screw, basically, rack and the screw, which are, I've stuck these images on the slide. So, these are torture images. The rack and the screw are both used to torture prisoners. So she says that for my own love for being tortured in a way, I married this man. I said, I do, I do. I do is represents marriage. So she says, I do in marriage. She married Ted Hughes. So, daddy, I'm finally through. Now she says that, now I'm done with being exploited by both these women, both these men. I want to come out from both these two exploitative relationships. The black telephone's off at the foot. The voice just can't bomb through. So she says that now she will not communicate with anything that happened in the past. Now she wants to actually snap all the ties from the past, and that's what she means by saying the black telephone's off at the root. So she does not want to communicate with her past, with the voices of the past. And if I've killed one man, I've killed two. The vampire who said he was you and drank my blood for a year, 7 years. If you want to know, daddy, you can lie back now. Now she says that I've killed one man, I've killed two. So in the beginning of the poem, she says, I've had to kill you. She says, daddy, I've had to kill you. Now she says, if I've had killed one man, I've killed two. Basically, she says that now I've gotten rid of not only your influence on my life, but I've also gotten rid of the influence that my husband has had on my life. So I've killed you and I've killed the memory of my husband as well. The vampire, now she identifies her husband with the vampire who said he was you and drank my blood for a year, 7 years, if you want to know. Now this is an allusion to the 7 years of marriage that she had to Ted Hughes, and she compares him to a vampire. And she has now really killed the memory of both her father as well as her husband. Daddy, you can lie back now. And it is as if she's, if he was still alive, having distinct presence in her life, even after his death. But now she says that now you can die. Now you can lie down. Now you will not have anything to do with my life. So now he is finally dead for her. There's a stake in your fat black heart, and the villagers never liked you. They were dancing and stamping on you. They always knew it was you. Daddy, daddy, you bastard, I'm through. Now finally, in this final lines of conclusion, she says that now she's getting rid of the influence that her father has had on her. And now she refers to vampire lore. And in vampire stories, you would often have the story of a quaint village and a vampire who's not identified by anyone. So she says that they have had to kill, and the vampire would be killed by a stake or a dagger through his heart. And so there's this flat black heart of the vampire of her father, which has actually been pierced by now the villagers. Okay, and this is a stark comparison to her pretty red heart. This flat black heart is a stark comparison to her own heart. And so the reference to the vampire stories that they would live around villages and kill villagers. Now the villagers have also come to know that the father was the blood drinking vampire. So no one mourns his death. In fact, people are happy about his death. So this is it's her own hatred and it's her own anger that she is describing in her poem. That even in your death, no one really is mourning you. Everyone hates you so much that they're happy that you're dead. So this is the ultimate height of her own frustration that is slowly peaking, and it peaks finally in the last stanza, the last line, and she says, daddy, daddy, you bastard, I'm through. And finally, after the last angry outburst where she calls him a bastard, she said, now I'm actually done with all the influences that you've had on my life. I am now free. I now declare myself free. So this is the poem Daddy, Sylvia Plath's Daddy. I hope you understood it. Thank you very much.